Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Welcome to the Starseed Ministry. It is Monday, June 6, 2022. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome if you're new to the channel. Hello to the Starseed Fellowship and the Catalyst Classroom. Just keep an eye out for those who are part of the Starseed Fellowship. We're going to get our scheduled gathering together on Zoom this week. So I'm going to be putting out some messages on Subscribestar in our private Telegram chat and get that all scheduled up. So how is everyone? It is Monday. Wow. Does it feel like you're in some sort of strange time warp? It does to me for sure, and I am really curious how people are experiencing things energetically right now. How the weekend was, that Leo moon over the weekend with Mercury and Saturn flipping the script. So I put the astrology, I uploaded the astrology forecast on Friday, well, actually Thursday evening for the week, Friday to Friday. And so the big players, Mercury station direct, Saturn station retrograde over the weekend. And today the sun is going to be in a sextile to Chiron. And in fact, there's going to be a lot of interesting connections between major planets and minor asteroids, actually, but they represent some pretty strong features of the astrology. And then the moon in Virgo as of this morning, very early this morning or late last night, we're going to have a first quarter moon. So I talked about the interesting time distortion or some sort of time or flipping of the script with Mercury and Saturn basically switching directions. And I actually did have this imagery last week about an hourglass flipping over. And in fact, when we get to today's reading, we're going to see that imagery is absolutely part of the overall guidance for the energies right now. So how is everyone feeling? How was your weekend? It was all sorts of 4D here last night. Yeah, it's so bizarre. Things are weird. Yes, I totally agree with that. Like which way is up and which way is down. It's all a bit scrambled right now. Yes, this is great feedback because I feel exactly the same way. So I was in New York City again this weekend. I have to be honest, I was really very nervous. It took quite a bit of grounding to be able to trust going into that situation. And in fact, there was a mass shooting in Philly on Saturday night down in South Street, which it's where my family is from. I was born in that area. I can't tell you how many times I've been on South Street on a Saturday night at 11:30 p.m. bar hopping as a younger person. And so to make that connection, and knowing that something like that was going to transpire over the weekend was very difficult to just trust that everything was as it should be and to walk into these situations with always this underlying tone now. And what's interesting is that part of that experience and that fear-based reaction and feeling all the way down into the visceral aspects of the body is exactly what it is meant to trigger. So it's very interesting to be able to work with that energy and be aware of it and still also experience it and have to in real time actually ground yourself and realize that you still have to walk into situations and can't not live your life. And it was a great weekend. It was beautiful in New York. We saw another Broadway show. It was not busy for a June weekend in New York City. I was shocked. And Barbara and I have talked about this, and she had related this to us in a different conversation, how it seems to be. And others of you, if you are familiar with New York City, if you live there, you may already know this too. Things are definitely at a reduced capacity in terms of what it usually is. And I suspect it's going to be like that for a while. Super emotional this weekend, had periods of feeling like an outside observer of reality. Barb says, I second that. Lots of drama, but more going deep inside and watching relating to the flipping. I think that's really, man, I feel like that's exactly what we should be doing. And in fact, it's going to be interesting as I go through the astrology for today and the moon in Virgo. It's going to challenge a lot more of the outwardly directed output energy of Mars in particular that, has you being more the participant as opposed to the observer, and all the ways that this is either balancing itself out. And the challenges, right? A moon in Virgo is an opportunity for us to, find that blending and balancing of polarization within ourselves, within our own actions, our own behaviors, our own routines, practices, devotions, really. So, and of course, there's lots of drama with the moon in Leo. I mean, it's not necessarily surprising to have felt that, but also had the opportunity to be a witness of that as well. I left my home for a total of 36 hours, and when I returned, I felt like a week had transpired. So I knew coming into this weekend that there would be a tipping of the hourglass, some sort of temporal distortion that came to almost a stasis point as you're flipping the hourglass, and that things would, in the shifting of direction with Saturn and Mercury, that there would be some sort of temporal distortion. And to feel it and to experience it is pretty wild. And it does remind us that even time, we feel like time is a fixed thing. And when we talk about Saturn, the universal clock is part of what Saturn represents, and the essence of Capricorn. And even in Aquarius, it does represent the very physical, material nature and the structure and the scaffolding of the civilization. But remember, it's a civilization based on the collective human voice, right? The collective human experience, everybody coming forward as themselves, as sovereign individual beings, and then creating a harmony, a collective harmony. So going retrograde, Saturn going retrograde, oh boy, it's going to be it feels like that there's a lot more time than we think, right? With Saturn stationing retrograde, we're either going to basically collapse under the density of of that voice, whatever it is, or you are going to realize just how confident, strong, and where your authority and strength from the human collective is really coming from. So, wow, we have some interesting times ahead. And everybody's feedback is, and let us know in the comments if you're catching this on the replay, if you're not in the live. Like, this is definitely what I felt, and it seems to be across the board. So I want to share a little bit of space weather stuff, because I think that there's some things here that are interesting in terms of how we may understand this, or how it seems to how we can make a connection between the temporal experience and maybe what's happening in terms of the sun and magnetics and the Schumann resonance and all of these things, right? We're forming a bridge. We are, in a lot of ways, this bridge as we make a transition. And so we are in the time period where we're experiencing it in real time as we are shifting into another version and perception of time, which is, and be like, that's interesting. And just like people are saying, it's very emotional, it's very dramatic. You're in the midst of these experiences, but at the same time, there is Saturn in Aquarius opposite that Leo energy of just like, okay, standing firm, finding that rebar that like anchors you to the ground as everything swirls around you. And in this case, in the retrograde, it's going to be turned inward. And like I said, you either collapse under the density or you are able to recognize your own inner authority. And it's, Saturn's going to be retrograde for a while. So at least until October. So we have a lot of time. We have more time than we think. And it's pretty wild to see how these things unfold. So let me bring up, let's bring this out. And I'm going to start sharing some images here of our sun. Maybe, there we go. It does feel like I have like a time hangover. I don't even know what that means, but that's what it feels like right now. Okay, my friends. So here we go. This is our sun currently. You can see, so it is mellow, right? The sun is for a solar maximum cycle. There are tons of sunspots, but they're rotating out of view, and they are stable, magnetically stable. They're not really seeming to flare very much right now, which is very interesting. So the sun is very stable. There are no real coronal holes facing us right now as well. So the possibility of solar wind right now is not on necessarily on the horizon. And even if you look at the solar wind, you see that it had been pretty stable in its temperature, dropping in its speed considerably. And then there was this little blip, right? You can see here in the KP index, right? It was really mellow, pretty stable all weekend. It's so interesting that the Schumann and the magnetosphere of the planet itself was really mellow over the weekend. And when we look at the Schumann, we'll see that it was like almost, it was just like flatline, these little blips here and there. And then just this morning, there seems to be an elevation. You can see the speed went up pretty fast, that there was geomagnetic unrest as well. So something happened, and it's very possible that the CME that was released last week, there was a magnetic filament that exploded. So that may have given this glancing blow that all of a sudden kind of like, whoa, excited the magnetosphere. So, but otherwise, it has been really, really mellow. So here's the Schumann over the weekend. You can see it, just hardly anything. And then early this morning, you're looking at 12 p.m. Russia time, so that's 11 hours ahead of East Coast Eastern Standard Time on the U.S., so that's 1 a.m. here, if you go back 11 hours from noon in Russia. So yeah, 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, it hits up to 44, so there was definitely an amplification after a weekend of being really mellow and not any real big flares from the sun. But what I think is interesting is something that I think is possibly part of not only, this temporal distortion having to do with Saturn and Mercury kind of switching directions, and in terms of, and they're not literally shifting directions. It's all a matter of perspective relative to speed and location, right? It looks like these planets are going now backwards and forwards, and they're not. They're going in the same direction, but it just looks that way. Now, what is interesting, though, is you see that the Schumann all weekend, when the magnetosphere was mellow, that the amplification was really, at a very low volume, basically. You see the opportunity for the Schumann to come up and hover around over 8 hertz when it is normally much lower towards the 7, anywhere between 7 and 8 is the baseline, right? Which you could probably look at right about here, the yellow line. So you can see, though, that it is hovering, and it comes down again, and it comes back up, and it takes a lot more energy to sustain this frequency, right? A frequency is the measure of how many wavelengths per unit of time. And so it provides more energy because there are more particles, more photons per oscillation, more energy, higher frequency. So the Schumann is getting an opportunity to hover around these higher frequencies when it's mellow, and then you can see that there was an amplification, and then it drops back down to its baseline again, right? And we've talked about this a lot of times, right? If you think about pitch, and you think about volume, and you think about tone of an instrument in your voice, if it gets really loud, the pitch usually drops because it takes a stronger embouchure, or a stronger, just a stronger, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm speaking in terms of what I know, which is an embouchure, right? Which is the musculature of your mouth when you're playing a wind instrument. Same thing with your voice, right? Unless there is a strength there to hold that amplification at a higher pitch, it'll usually drop. So you see this very consistently every time the Schumann amplifies. If we go back, you'll see, and many of you know this, and I'm sorry if it's just like you're talking about the same thing over and over, but I never know who's going to be new and if this is new information to them. So you see the Schumann amplify up to a much louder, a bigger wavelength, and then it drops in frequency. So it's the same thing with us. It takes more energy to be louder and higher frequency. So tapping into the planet is really one of the best ways to modulate for ourselves, and also to align with, to resonate what it feels like, and its experience of being at these higher frequencies in our bodies, like actual electromagnetics. So that's just, and so I do feel like that being at this higher frequency with the Schumann resonance, I do feel like that there has something to do with this temporal distortion. There's just not, it's a very low, stable volume. It's almost like being in meditation, right? And it's when your heart is at that very baseline, right? And you're calm and you're in stasis almost in your meditation. And then your frequency starts to raise, right? It starts to raise, it starts to get higher. And the trick is to keep it that high and also make it that loud when you need to. And it's a very difficult thing. Even the planet is still, I feel like, working this out in some ways when she amplifies her field in order to, thwart off any kind of intrusion, right? Of solar wind, plasma, coronal mass ejection, right? Cosmic energy and cosmic rays. So we are working with the planet in this process. So, and the other thing that I wanted to show you, it was kind of hard to get a hold of. I should have recorded it first thing this morning, but you can even see that the magnetosphere is starting to get way more dense now. So I'm sure there is like the glancing blow, right, of a CME that got like shot off last week that is finally making its way here, but it's enough to make the density of the magnetosphere much more. And you can see that surrounding the planet in this real-time imagery. So the darker it gets, the more dense it is. And the more dense it is means there's more protons in the magnetosphere. There's more particles. And so it's likely that it's a CME. There's more plasma in the magnetosphere, which is going to excite the ionosphere in some ways as well. So let's get into the reading here so that we can start to take it, as we usually do, take it from the exoteric, the more material realm, and start to apply the esoteric and spiritual and energetic aspects of things in order to balance ourselves. And that's a big part of today's reading, actually, is this balance element. So let's find the reading for you guys. There you go. So this, it seems like that every week it's a challenge. It's a challenging reading. It's a challenging experience if it's in the strictly material, in our horizontal axis here of cause and effect. When we're strictly in the material, it does seem very challenging and has continued to be so. There's a lot of great guidance that is surrounding this energetic snapshot here, because as much as in the heart of things that we come to recognize a sense of completion, but also where we have to go from here with the three of discs right here in the center, there does appear to be still a lot of what seems like either burnout with a sun reversed. There's a sense of kind of a focus on lack of balance, right? Losing one's inner authority or even outer authority, loss of position with this will, wisdom, and mind in its reversal. But the cardinal, the sands of time reversed, right? There's more time than we think. The hourglass gets turned over, and the cardinal is about balance. So it feels to me that we have, strangely enough, and I don't think people, in some ways, I'm sure there's this sense of time. Can we just pull this Band-Aid off? Well, Saturn in retrograde until October is like the clock stopping and turning around, right? You're hitting, and the time the time, it's like time itself slowing down and coming to a standstill and almost stopping. But Mercury stationing retrograde, that aspect of our own consciousness, now it's stationed direct and is going to move into its home sign of Gemini. We get to move freely through this time portal, whatever it is for us. So that's a really good perspective to consider when it comes to finding balance, being grounded, realizing that time is a density and dimension and not a fixed thing necessarily, that it's not a linear experience, but only in the, if strictly material. Now, also, too, I think there's still a lot of feels here that we're attaching to at a base level with this division within ourselves, and how much it really seems to hurt, and how much there is a lot of emotional baggage attached to this battle. And there's this sense here that we really do need to, in some ways, give ourselves some space for solitude, to recognize that everything we need is already here within us. And again, it seems counterintuitive because there's so much messaging that is like, go out and do things, right? Go and keep moving, right? And this is where we're feeling right here, this 3 of discs. But I feel like if there's burnout to begin with, or some sort of false glittery illusion with this sun retrograde, there's a lot of deceit when you have a 7 of swords reversed, right? I mean, it's already a difficult card of futility because it is the unmasking usually of some sort of illusion or some sort of cheating. But when it's reversed like this, it really it's kind of like the no lesson learned necessarily, or the deception continues, or there's a really sense of self-pity around this as well. So let's unpack this and see what's going on here. So when we have the sun reversed, like I said, there's never a bad way for this card to be. Like I said, the sun reversed is still the joy of life. It's still creativity. It's sun in the 5th house. Now remember, that is the home of the sun is the 5th house. This is a Leo card, right? So we had our moon in Leo over the weekend. So in some ways, this is the reversal or the contrast to normally what the sun would be when the moon is in Leo as opposed to the sun in Leo. So the good thing about this is that with the moon in Leo, you have the added element of the water, because otherwise you have a desert, right? Without any water, without any moisture, without any space in which to shine upon or to activate, there is a desert, right? It is not necessarily bearing life. So also, some other reads of this card reversed are promising much and doing nothing, right? There's, like I said, there's a glittery, dazzling kind of like, hey, but it's not really turning into anything. There can be self-complacency, and also too, narcissism is a big part of the Leo archetype, the 5th house, when it is not well aspected, or if there is dysfunction there. I mean, that's, you get conceited. It's conceit, and then narcissism as like a personality disorder of the 5th house. So, but even it's in its reversal, it's just kind of a reminder of like, don't, in terms of burnout, or maybe things were promised and they didn't turn out to be what we wanted them to be, perhaps. And being complacent. But I also get the sense that this is burnout. Perhaps this is an inner sun that has been shining. Maybe just the moon in Leo in general is, kind of having us internalize a lot of this experience of joy and optimism and a feeling of creativity. Remember that the sun is a power that always gives without reducing itself, which is kind of it's not exactly true, because a star does die eventually. When it runs out of hydrogen to fuse together, it starts its dying process. And we actually talked about this a little bit on the last Catalyst classroom when we talked about the nature of stars like Aldebaran and why they are these large giants, right? But yet they're cooler than our own sun. And it's because they're dying, right? They're going through their dying phase. But in its main sequence, our star, the sun, Sol, right? SOL, It's giving without reducing itself in that moment. And that is really the very definition of a catalyst. So even if we were feeling all of this brilliance within ourselves, or at least experiencing this intensity as a moon in Leo, I still think that there's a sense of optimism and brilliance and power that can come out of that. Now, the worst case scenario here is, like I said, this narcissism. I got a strong like black sun vibe from this when I first pulled it out in terms of the contrast. Saturn in its retrograde, it still makes me think about a dying star, right? The fact that it will collapse under its own density and its own gravity, and that's how a star truly then ends up supernova, or turns into a neutron star, or turns into a white dwarf, right? There's a lot of different options depending on the size and the mass of the star to begin with. And so I also got this strong vibe here. So what I think is interesting as we move forward from this is that, still at the heart here, Mars in Capricorn, the three of discs, the works. I mean, we do get a crystallization moment here, and the commencement of matter to be established, right? There's an admission here that progress was made. The 3 is a very stable numerological structure, but it's also at the very beginning, right? More work is needed. You have to get to the 6, right, where you bring the 3 back around, but it's in opposition and contrast, which is where manifestation really comes from. That's real transmutation, is bringing these two polar opposites together. And this is upright, right? This is at the heart right here, is that there is something that has absolutely clicked into place now and is ready to start building off of it. Some sort of foundation that we feel here. Now, just keep in mind, depending on how this sun really reads for you, if it represents burnout, if it represents a sense of narcissism, or that black sun, or a sense of density, right? The dying portion of a star. If it represents just that moon in Leo over the weekend, that was much more of an internalized process rather than the full brilliance, but an experience of it or a reflection of it. That also could be this as well. But right here, right now, I mean, there's a sense that something has commenced, right? There is a manifestation in a very physical, material way that has found crystallization in this moment. So when we look at, where are we at here? Yep. Where we are energetically at our root, there's still the feels here with the War of the Roses, right? And one thing I think is important to notice, and this imagery will come up a lot, and it has been. I mean, it's part of a very strong marketing campaign politically in some ways, but there are storm clouds in the background of this card. You can see that they're gathering, right? And so there is a war within a relationship, a battle within your own heart, right? This is representing where the collective is energetically rooted some way. And there's a lot of broken heart. There's a lot of battle within people. There is a lot of wanting to square off despite attempts to not create this division. But what we do also feel is a lack of reciprocity, that there are power plays going on. What's happening in this relationship is not compatible with the soul, right? This facing off. And so again, you can see how much has been, kind of guiding and directing many of us socially and culturally right now into this battlefield again. And I think that our emotions are so easily utilized in order to bring us back here that we don't even realize it. We also, I think many of us deep down really do feel this war coming, regardless if it's literal or if it is, within our own experience. And how we feel about this and what we're going to necessarily do about it. So when you have this coming, and you also have at the top of your awareness and your attention this sense of diminished authority, loss of position when this will, wisdom, and mind is knocked over, right? Your crown is like knocked off of you. There's a sense of overthinking, spinning your wheels, wondering what the hell you're doing, and having no clarity about what to do next. I can say for sure that there's been many clients in the last like couple weeks that have specifically voiced this type of perspective, right? And so I think there's many of us, it's coming to a head, and much of action can seem really futile and repetitive. And when we talk about futility, we are talking about the Seven of Swords. So it also says, though, but that wherever we're going to land and however we do it, we will stand. That's the thing about the crest of the Isle in order to reconnect to our spirit, which is interesting since now Mercury is direct. I mean, talk about wanting to get into your head, but it's still in Taurus, right? It is still in the same degree in conjunction with the Pleiades and Algol that it's been for a hot minute. So we're still not really with Mercury and Gemini quite yet. Strength and authority have now become the foundation upon which to build anew, right? And so it does feel this way, I think, and some people more than others, right? That there's a diminishing of authority. And in some cases, this is something that maybe certain people want others to have a diminished authority, right? Perhaps some people are realizing the battle is not worth it, and that they feel it so deeply within themselves, but they're realizing that they better cut their losses and perhaps maybe, move towards some sort of balance or redemption in some ways. But this also signals to us that when we do feel diminished authority, when we do have a loss of position, when it does feel like our sovereign nature is knocked off of our head, this is an opportunity to reestablish that within ourselves. So that is a very useful perspective, I think, right now. Now, Seven of Swords, like I said, it's never easy. The seven is the fall from grace, no matter what suit you find it in the tarot. So the thing with the swords is that we will go out of our way mentally in order to and utilize cleverness and deceive ourselves or other people. It just depends on where you find this and in reference to what. When it's reversed like this, it is deceit. There are illusions. There's really evil tricks, right? There is an attempt to really maintain this illusion or deceive people. Now, the best case scenario for this card upright is the unmasking of illusions and disguises. But when it's reversed like this, it's like definitely feeling sorry for yourself and just kind of believing the lie in order to not have to come to terms with what is, right? The moon in Aquarius is really meant to give us a little bit of aloofness emotionally so that we're not so connected to the experience of it. But I also feel like that in this case, it goes a little bit too far where some people may find themselves like just lying to themselves, basically. And again, this has a lot to do with what this reverse sun could really represent for you. It's going to have a different feeling for everybody. This is also an inner futility, right? If you look at all of these reversals as just experiences within ourselves or an inwardly focused experience, then you can see that even though we feel that there is a moment of crystallization, everything surrounding it, even with this Six of Roses here, this War of the Roses, this battle that we are really finding a lot of our subconscious and deeper root emotions coming from, there is a sense of inner futility here that we are going to go through maybe an inner unmasking, right? So again, it really depends on how you're looking at this and if you're taking your own process seriously. Now, again, we have more time than we think, and in some ways that's going to really piss people off. In other ways, this is actually great in terms of we can get ourselves in balance, right? Especially when we realize that time is not this linear progression that we get to an end goal and everything is perfect and we never have to do anything ever again. That's not how it works. It's much more cyclical. It's an oscillation, just like sound is an oscillation, just like light moves in an oscillation. Time is also moving in a wave function. So hence the cycle, but not the trap, right, of the false matrix of just going around and around in the feedback loop. That's the 10, right? That's the false matrix. That's the AI false hologram that we're caught in, right? It's much more of an oscillation, right? That is traveling, but is in this wave function. So, great guidance surrounding it, though. Like I said, wishes fulfilled. It seems very interesting to have this card here, but what I picked up on was just like we have everything that we need in this terms of where our energetic root really is, right? I mean, when you feel that way and you walk away from the battlefield, right? The snow leopard is about solitude, because these animals live in a solitary way. They're very territorial. They have a wide territory. They don't travel in packs at all, right? They are very much on their own. And so solitude is a choice. And it's not push everybody away. This is about making decisions to separate yourself from all of the noise, and certainly the emotional triggers that will pull you back onto the battlefield. And also, too, taking a step away is going to fill your cup way more than expending it in this battle, whatever it is, that's really not worth it, but is still very much at the root of what's going on with us right now, because there is still a lot of emotionality attached to this. So this is really good guidance. And then here's the cardinal. I mean, it spells it out pretty clearly, about balance, right? Spiritual pursuits, physical pleasure, right? Material, spiritual. They're out of balance. Bringing them into equilibrium is the name of the game, right? That is what transmutation is. And so, yes, we may feel out of balance because the authority may have been diminished in some way. And this is saying it's about getting ourselves back into balance. And, sands of time, the 6 of scrolls. Here's another 6. That's very interesting, right? Because we have the 6 of roses, and now we have the 6 of scrolls. But it's reversed, right? The sand has been turned over, and we have more time than we think that we do. To work on this, right? And that's part of Saturn in its retrograde, I think, is to give it gives us an opportunity to work with a different oscillation of time or a different experience of time. Saturn is the hourglass and the sand and everything, right? That's what it represents, is the unfolding of time and space in this material realm here. And so there's something about Mercury and Saturn over the weekend that flipped the hourglass, and we as conscious thinking beings and what Mercury represents is now moving direct, right? And so we get to engage with the realm of thoughts and thinking and movement and ideas, outside of the normal boundaries of time. And somebody, I think it was Alex K, that said it got really 4D around here, and that's a really good way to put it. So, and so not to get caught up in what seems like the timing, right? Because it's more event-based. And astrology is definitely events, right? Events that are built into our travel through the universe. But it's not necessarily date-oriented. It is, but it's based on when the events happen, that the date on the calendar is important. So, man, I honestly feel for, I feel like this is I feel for whoever has got this reverse sun as more of a black sun type of focus, because they're just lying to themselves, right? They're just lying to themselves. And it really does have a lot to do with the fact that the authority has been diminishing for a long time, and still very much caught up in the emotional battle within. So, I mean, it's so important, I think, to see what's going on outside of this, because that's where the real help comes from. So we're going to see in the astrology today that there's a lot of help coming in right now to assist with all of what's happening here. So I'm going to bring up the chart right now, actually, and see what's going on here with the astrology. And I'm going to check in with the chat too real quick. I want to see what's going on for people, and also share it with people who aren't live and don't get to see the chat if you're on a different platform other than YouTube. So let's see here. I'm going to transition over here. Here's our chart, and let's see. All right. All right, friends. Okay, Moon in Virgo. Sorry, guys. It's going to be meticulous every step of the way. I don't know what to say. I cleaned the crap out of my house yesterday leading up to this Virgo moon. So, and there's still plenty more to do. That's usually how I spend the Virgo moon time, is like, here, what can I clean out of what kind of clutter can I clean or resituate so that my own inner landscape feels that way as well. So here's today, the 6th. So there's some really interesting things happening today. Now, Mercury is direct. It's moving in its direct motion now. Over the weekend, it was it's stationed, and so it had come to, both of Mercury and Saturn, both stationed and came to a standstill. And I think that's really why it seemed like wherever you were at that time, it felt like time really slowed down, or just didn't even matter, right? It wasn't even relative to what was happening around you. But when we moved back maybe to a different location, perhaps, at least in my experience, it was like, oh, a whole week, and it didn't. It was still 36 hours according to everyone else around there as well. But to me, it felt like an entire week. And that's really relevant too with your dream state. Astral travel is like this. Any kind of visitation or contact experiences. If you're having astral travel to other places, other time periods, other dimensions, and certainly if you're going onto any type of craft during this time, again, it's the same thing. Like, time is absolutely different. And I don't want to say it's irrelevant or an illusion. When I say it's an illusion, and when other people say it's an illusion, it's an illusion based on the finality of it. It's not what it seems to be in this density. So, but now Mercury is moving direct, right? And so the consciousness is definitely now moving, right? The sands of the hourglass are now slipping into, and it's almost like in this moment there seemed to be like a second chance that was built in to the astrology, actually, and just the cosmic time clock itself, right? Because Saturn in its retrograde is now kind of slowing that pattern, that larger time clock. And that's what happens when you get closer to black holes, right? And time is varied based on gravitational influence as well. So all of these interesting things that I'm sure are going to continue to unfold for all of us and lead us in all the different directions. But Mercury now moving direct is going to eventually come into that last trine with Pluto, a big Pleiadian activation one last time as it moves in its direct motion, and it'll make that trine to Pluto that is retrograde and will continue to be retrograde through the summer. This last moment of perspective, real mature understanding of not just, it's knowing things is one thing, but understanding them, truly understanding them, feeling in your body what balance is really going to, man, that's going to be on Friday, on the 10th. So everything leading up to them is opportunity to prepare for that moment where something again clicks into place finally, and you're like, oh, I get it now, right? And that's going to be, I think, a really important moment. So we have Lilith is just crossed over the star Sirius, and I talked about this on the astrology report from last week as well, that there's something very deeply, something primal, something deep, something very having to do with self-preservation, something that is darker than even our own subconscious and internalized landscape, right? Lilith is the moon's apogee, right? The place in its orbit that's furthest away from Earth. And so it's opposite the point where the moon is supposed to be closest to Earth, and so it's deep. It's something that is just it's a placeholder in some ways, which I think is interesting. And the more I learn about Lilith, the more I'm intrigued and confused. So. Just in general, mythologically, my own esoteric experiences, and then astrologically as well. So she's just coming off of her conjunction with Sirius right now. And so she's going to be in a sextile to Chiron today, a square to Chiron at the same time that the sun, as you can see here, is in a sextile to Chiron. So the sun has moved from the discovery portion of Gemini now into the exteriorization, or the outward expression of what we are learning and discovering, right? And so it's very dramatic again. There's a sense of almost proselytizing and really trying to exteriorize or share what has been learned, right, in a passionate and dramatic type of experience. And so this, in a sextile to Chiron, this is an Andromedan activation, 16 degrees of Aries, right, where we are being invited to open our minds to a much more intuitive, non-rational experience of life within ourselves. And with Chiron here, this has been, of course, pulling us away from this. Every time we attempt to be like, you know what, I can just be in alignment with what is, or get in alignment with cosmic forces, or natural attunement. And Chiron's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You don't get to just do that whenever you want. You have to stay in this old identity, in this old role, right? You don't get to establish yourself ever, right? You don't actually get to be like a little child. You have too much responsibility, right? It's already cemented in place. This is who you are, blah, 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 blah. All the Chiron wounded healer stuff. I think that this moment here with the sun in Gemini, this sextile, is an opportunity to really blast that identity just away, and be able to identify ourselves, or identify with that expression of like, no, I am who I say I am at any given moment, and I can choose to have a more holistic perspective, to become like a little child again in my own identity, to connect to the divine life force within myself without feeling guilty about it, without feeling shame about it, without somebody else telling us who we are. So the sextile, right, this is a inner transmutation. This is a harmonious connection that requires some participation. And I think it's the sun representing our brilliance, our expression, our outward momentum in some ways. That catalyst, right, that gives of itself without ever diminishing its own energy, that is really allowing us to exteriorize. So maybe something that we're sharing, maybe we're just identifying with this type of experience of like, I've learned something about what it means to be who I am without any external influence, and how shame and guilt and a sense of wounding has been used against me in order to, keep my identity and my sense of divine power and activation under control, right? Based on old wounds, based on a sense of victimhood, whatever it is. So you can see how this could go sideways, right? There's always the contrast with these aspects. And I also see too that this is an uptick in the wounded healer and victim savior aspect that is going to find expression through some sort of activist type of bullhorn. It will happen. With this, I mean, you can see it building already, and there are plenty of really legitimately awful, tragic things that are happening in order to stimulate this. And again, what do you think all of those shootings are doing? Every single time it is triggering that Chiron wound, right? That pulls you back into some version of yourself that somebody else is deciding for you, right? And as much as Mars and Jupiter at their conjunction was really powerful, it was also really powerful for our own sense of self-starting, enterprising, bold action, right? We do have a crystallization here with Mars in Capricorn, this 3 of discs, but these two together, they're so much better off when they're in opposition, balancing each other out. And so there is, we'll get into that because there is... there's some square action that's coming with Lilith and Mars as well this week. So you can see how both of these things are possibilities here. And that 6 of Roses, remember, right? The rootedness at like, we need to face off with each other, right? That's what the card is representing, that there seems like there is no other option other than this face off, and the individual soul and spirit realizing like, oh, this is not actually conducive to what I want, and maybe walking away from that battle. Well, the battle is definitely being triggered, and this sextile with the Sun and Chiron is definitely being utilized for that reason. So the best thing we can do is boomerang that stuff with our own light, right? And to use this energy for our own spiritual transmutation, because that is the that's the golden ticket, right? That is the secret weapon more than anything else happening externally, is all of us like actually spiritually awakening through this process. So now at the same time, Chiron in a square to Lilith is the challenge here is, and where I think, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's important, is this concept of the problem of real integration here into whatever it is that the Cancerian element represents for you. So, when you're integrating your personality, right, that's your first house, your personality. When you're integrating it into this, conviction or this type of decision that is the first half of the Cancer sign, we see somebody studying a mandala, right? And the mandala symbolizes the integration of opposing trends. This is what happens in Cancer throughout a lot of the Cancer zodiac sign, is that Gemini is this consistent, working with the dialectic. Mercury is going to come into Gemini very soon, is going to stay within its retrograde shadow till the 18th of June. So we have still within the shadow period up until the full moon, and a little bit past that. So, but the idea here with Lilith, it's like a placeholder, something deep within ourselves that we don't even realize is there, that is symbolizing the need to, and the effort on our part of each of our consciousness to reach a solid basis of understanding, right? And this may require an inward turning of attention and a concentration and a sense of going very deep within ourselves. And so the square to Chiron, again, is a challenge to either the victim or savior aspect of Chiron that is just responding to whatever infusion of energy it's responding to or being exposed to. It could be, a sense of coming out of that Chiron dichotomy of victim savior, and it comes out as a result of this very deep integration of opposing trends in order to integrate the personality, right? It's not enough just to have your personality, which, Chiron and Aries, I mean, it's just the starting point. That is the starting point. But if you don't have that, which Chiron is consistently showing that how easily we get pulled into shame and guilt about being ourselves, but it's not enough just to be ourselves. We have to integrate ourselves into our families, into our marriage or domestic partnership, right? Into our country, into our clan, whatever it is, our family, spiritual family, whatever it is that represents that decision, that inner self, and where our core is. This is about the integration, Lilith, and it's reminding us that it's not just about our personality, that there needs to be a space in which this is integrated into, and that's where Lilith is like a placeholder for, okay? And this square, I think, is bringing it out so very much right now. So as we go through the rest of today, I think the moon will be in Virgo all day. Uranus and Pallas Athena are actually in a conjunction here, 16 to 7 degrees Taurus. And again, this it's a strategy that may be outside of the box. There may be a strategy that is innovative. Maybe it's a strategy that is represents maybe coming outside of transcending to a higher consciousness about assets and resources and value and wealth, right? Uranus and Taurus. But it's also the strategy and the wisdom that an awakening to the strategy and wisdom of this very distilled kind of polarity within us, right? Our spiritual nature and our material nature, or our ego consciousness, right? How do we blend them? How do we balance them? Where's our equilibrium? So Pallas and Uranus coming together as well today is just, I think, really strongly reinforcing this, and giving a much more practical and, like I said, strategic element here to something that often is so outside of the realm of our normal consciousness that sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around, especially in Taurus, right? So, because it's really just shifting the landscape itself. And so, embodying this, I think, is the strategy with Pallas Athena involved as well. And Mars comes into a square with asteroid Ceres actually today. So Ceres is over here in Cancer too, and she's at 9 to 10 degrees Cancer. 9 to 10 degrees 9 to 10 degrees Cancer. Mars is at 9 to 10 degrees Aries. This is a square as well. And the aspect that relates to our process of the triple goddess, right? Ceres represents the oscillation or the wave function of nature herself, right? So she represents agriculture and the grain, and the idea that the seasonal relationship of yin and yang and contrast and or contraction and expansion, darkness and light is all part of the process of being able to grow something new. And so for Ceres, who is really a dwarf planet instead of an asteroid, but is in that asteroid area, is in this 10 degrees of Cancer is like a raw diamond that is going through the process of being shaped, and it's not easy, and there's a lot of pressure and heat and a grinding noise, but what it's doing is shaping us in this way, and with Lilith right here again, into the process of personality integration, into a process of actually becoming the person who we already are, this diamond in the rough, right? Or this natural, valuable aspect that is now being shaped as a result of exposure to the elements, right? To life. And, Mars, it's been such an interesting And in a lot of ways, really unsettling time for Mars to be in Aries, because you can see the output of this energy in very tragic ways. And and as much as we want to, act on maybe a new, revising our attitude, new symbolic meaning of things, right? Seeing things in a wider perspective. It's difficult for Mars to really do that. At least it's still in Aries. And so there's still some output that is here, but the square to Ceres here is it's just so, it is more, again, it's more than just the personality. It's more than just the subjective experience. It's more than the charge that comes out. It has, what is being challenged here is this sense of really, deep training in some ways. It's in the first stages of cutting. And this is at a much more internalized, experiential with Ceres, right? And in terms of what we are producing, this is a very interesting square that is happening today. All of these, like I said, major planets are in relationship with all these goddess asteroids, and Lilith as well. And so there is this connection that they are all having to these divine feminine energies that are almost grounding them or anchoring them so they don't just like fly off the handle either, right? Mars could stand to have that challenge with this mother energy, this really protective mother energy with Ceres in Cancer. And truly, this is part of why we have the seasons in terms of the mythology, is because Ceres went into a grieving mode and went into contraction and pulling away and died inside, basically, every time her daughter went into the underworld to be with Pluto. And it wasn't until she was back on the surface with her mother that there was life again and blooming and the possibility for growth. And so there's so much more value that comes from that situation. And yes, it's so much more difficult than Mars just being like, oh, I'm just going to see this from a new perspective and just keep going, right? It's like, no, you actually have to feel what it feels like to go through the process of being reshaped and formed. And I think that's going to, again, piss a lot of people off that are really just on this Mars and Jupiter tip of like, let's go forward. There's more time than we think. And right now it seems to be really guiding us to take advantage of, the time to find that equilibrium within ourselves. And maybe it'll just be through a very uncomfortable process within ourselves, or within the ability to produce sustainment and nourishment. That's the other thing that Ceres represents. And in Cancer, again, there's a strong protection element for this as well. So, the moon in Virgo all throughout the day, and it really only has these two main, from what I can tell, it has two main connections in early Virgo. That's going to be in a quincunx to both Jupiter and Mars while it's moving through Virgo. It's also going to be in an opposition to Vesta over here at 3 to 4 degrees Pisces, which is in conjunction to Fomalhaut, the fixed star Fomalhaut, which is one of the royal fixed stars. It's related to Archangel Gabriel, right? The messenger. So when we look at the moon's opposition to Vesta over here at 3 to 4 degrees, 3 to 4 degrees. And this really suggests that, the flame of sustainment for the community, for society, for humanity in a lot of ways, is there's a spiritual message coming through. And it can only, there's a lot of the collective unconscious swirling around, and there's this isthmus, right? That is a very narrow band of connection and interchange here that reminds me, well, it is an isthmus, but it also reminds me kind of like the eye of the needle in some ways, the narrow pathway. And in order to actually utilize the social resources in a way that makes sense or is productive, there has to be this linking somehow in some way. It's going to be the opposition with the moon in Virgo that's just like, well, that's great, but I'm attempting to find a way to balance these polarities within myself, as opposed to blending with or being engaged with the generalized tunnel or the the band, right? This very narrow band that is holding us all to, it's so narrow, and there's so much surrounding it that is, and it could easily get jammed up. And I think that the opposition with this moon in Virgo is, well, how do I not get jammed up in this process? And I think that's going to be really important moving forward, because if you're jammed up and you don't have equilibrium, how are you going to be part of a larger process that needs to keep this very narrow band, right? Just like a light beam shining. It can be a very narrow band in order for us to really communicate what it is that we are, and interacting with each other. And to receive the message, right? I mean, if you're just out to sea here, you're not going to get the divine message from Gabriel, right? This, again, has something to, Fomalhaut is in the mouth of the fish. And if you look at the constellations, and I should have pulled up a picture. If you look at the constellations, you see that the Aquarian constellation, the individual is pouring the water out of the pitcher or the container, and the water is seen to be coming towards the mouth of that fish, right? There is a narrow band in which to receive the divine message without getting caught up in all the other extraneous stuff, but it's so easily gummed up. And this moon opposite of it, I think it seems to be our means of keeping our own channel clear, right? Or attempting to find a way to blend or find our own equilibrium in this process, even though it's going to feel very much like, no, we all need to be on this same level and to receive the message. And I don't know exactly how that will play itself out today, but it does seem like the individual inner landscape in opposition to what is sustaining all of us right now is going to feel very strange. I think it'll feel very strange. And if you're a Virgo person, maybe not so much. And especially depending on where you have Virgo in your chart. So after this, though, the moon is, like I said, it's going to have a quincunx with Jupiter at the same time. And then we'll have a quincunx with Mars after it. So the quincunx with Jupiter is, there's this sense of, I can transcend myself, right? Which again is something we do want to identify with to a certain extent, that there's a new quality of being. There's a new dimension of being that is, mobilized through our own creative endeavors, through our own actualization. And Jupiter being this representative, larger than life, advocate in some ways, expanding on all of this is... The idea is great. It's going to be the adjustment as we internally start to become aware that there is more going on than we had previously thought. Again, that there is something more within us than we had realized, and a sense of unseen spiritual energies that and spirits, if you want to call them that, right? Support that is very present within us. That it's not that it it's not a problem with this quincunx. It just requires an adjustment. And if you, again, are just completely on this tip that it's all about me and what I'm doing, or you are being influenced into, if your personality is being influenced by, I would, Neptune and Pisces in some ways, like in a negative way, like propaganda, right? If you brought it in with you, then I think that's still, that's where the adjustment is going to come from. It's just like, wait a minute, there's way more going on within me than just this idea of like, I'm just going to, sprout wings and fly above all of this stuff. That sounds great with Jupiter, but, that sounds great with Jupiter because Jupiter is just that big picture, but the moon in Virgo is going to be like, wait a minute here. There's something else going on that I need to analyze. And that, like I said, if you're a Virgo person, this is going to make a lot of sense to you right now. Now, this is where the moon comes into a quincunx with Mars also in Aries later. And so Mars is still in this square to Ceres over here. But the moon in a quincunx, right? This is a 150-degree angle. It requires an adjustment on our part. Is being able. Here is kind of the capstone here. Two heads looking out and beyond the shadows. And Mars again is acting on. Oh, I have a new meaning, right? There's a new symbolic meaning here, and so I'm going to act on it. I'm going to revise. My attitude is being revised, and I see things or I interpret things in a much wider perspective, things that maybe were so, I had an emotional connection to, perhaps they are, I can see it in a larger abstraction now. There's not as much time to think about it necessarily with Mars and Aries because it is action. And so this quincunx, again, is about the inner capacity to look out beyond the shadows, right? To not get caught up in the duality, but to see beyond the duality. And in this case, it'll be an inner experience, an intuition. And maybe it's in that adjustment to see beyond the shadow that our whole purpose of acting, Mars in Aries, right? Whatever we're acting upon does take on a new meaning. But there, Aries and Virgo are obviously naturally in a quincunx to each other in general. So you take away Mars and the moon for a second and just look at these two signs. They are going to need adjustment because one of them is very much about the individual ego consciousness of Aries and actualization, and Virgo, which still requires some type of action or change, but it's very much about one's labors and how they're using their resources, right? So you're taking into account this whole realm of resources and the objective world when you're talking about Virgo. And Aries is not even considering any of that. So it's more responsible, it's more mature, it's more realistic, honestly, with Virgo, right? You're taking into account what is around you, and then you make these adjustments in terms of your own ego consciousness, right? And realizing it's not just about you or the ego consciousness or just instinct. There are resources around you that you actually consciously can put to use in order to repurify or reconstitute yourself. And again, if you're a Virgo person, this is something that'll be familiar to you, and I think the adjustment will be much easier. It also depends on where Virgo is in your chart as well, that's gonna have an impact. So when we go throughout the week, it's just important to keep in mind here that we're going to have the moon move through Virgo. It's going to cross Draco. It's actually did cross Draco by the end of today. The moon's going to be in Libra, right? That means it's going to be opposite Jupiter, Chiron, Mars. When the moon is in Libra in the middle of the week, the moon's going to come into Scorpio. And at this point is when, by the end of the week, if we go forward, let's see here. If we go forward a couple of days here, nope. I believe it's going to be when the moon is in Scorpio that and we have our first quarter moon, actually, just graced right over that. I talked a lot more about that, actually, I talked way more about that when I was doing astrology report from last week. So yes, the moon moves into Scorpio and Mercury is in a trine. Mercury direct will be in a trine to Pluto. So the feels will be intense. They will start to get very deep as we have this one last trine of the perspective, the Pleiadian perspective, really wrapping our minds around this Pleiadian perspective, mature understanding of what opposition really feels like and our conceptualization. And Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, right? The actual, the hidden, often hidden, occult, energetic under first quarter moon, which is tomorrow. We're going to see that there is, I'm trying to move it on the wrong screen. You'll see that what's interesting here with this first quarter moon is that there's a pretty strong expectation here that there's going to be an eruption in some ways, a cathartic eruption in many ways, right? Whatever, something under the surface that really needs to find its way out is going to really square this sense of mental maturity, right? A mental metamorphosis, something that allows us to emerge not as a hothead, but or even a robust type of thought process, but something really mature, something that has allowed us to grow up mentally a little bit. And I get the sense here that this first quarter, crisis in action, right? What are we going to do? It's going to be an outer reorganization of ourselves since this new moon is, I think we're just going to have to give ourselves the space for whatever this is, right? Whatever this eruption is out of us emotionally that is going to really challenge what we want to be doing, which is expressing ourselves in some sort of like mental maturity in some ways. It's really going to come, it's in that maturity and it's in that mental metamorphosis and our identification with it that actually is going to move things around in some way that allows this eruption to occur, whatever it is. Either with the moon, it's definitely going to be something very personal, something emotional. So this is tomorrow, right? Our first quarter moon. So you can already feel it leading up to this point. And I feel like that we have to give ourselves space in order to experience this reconfiguration. Or remember, Virgo is the 6th house, and so it's really getting down to the brass tacks of what it actually takes in order to purify or heal or address a personal challenge, deal with hidden enemies. All of these things are part of this 6th house, which is the Virgo house. This is what purifies us in order to be of service to our relationships, to society as a whole, whatever it is. And so part of that process is the cleansing and purification. And sometimes that is an eruption. And maybe that eruption comes from the moment of identification or the moment of a mental change, right? So we'll see how it goes. I think that by the end of this week, we're going to be ready for this last Mercury trine Pluto in its retrograde. And like I said, even though the moon will be in Scorpio, right? Because that's what Pluto rules, is Scorpio. It's going to be a lot of deep feels, but I think at this point we'll realize, or at least be able to tap into, the power within our connection to each other and our communion with each other in order to actually maintain a sense of mental maturity in that moment. And the perspective was only going to come from the Pluto in retrograde in Capricorn, or just in Capricorn, right? This Pleiadian perspective. And I think that this has been soul work a couple times over for the Pleiadians, right? I think that there is a lot of grief. I think there's a lot of regret about Atlantis. I think there's a lot of people walking around with Pleiadian soul resonance and frequencies that don't even realize they're carrying around this deep regret and grief, and in some ways feel paralyzed in terms of what they're doing here. They've completely shut off why they've come to as a starseed now, especially Pleiadian. And even if you do know, right, there's still a lot of grief that has had to work itself through these current experiences for the sake of everybody's learning and for this mission. So we'll talk more about that on Friday. So it's just good to know what we're moving into. So I'm going to leave it there for today, my friends. I'm going to check in with the stream and the chat. Full of COVID. Barbara says the weekend away was full of covert drama. It was like going to another planet. And when I got back, like processing a week's worth of stuff and the dreams were packed and reoriented to reality. Yeah, I totally feel that 100%. That same feeling, right? Of just like went into some weird time, temporal distortions. A lot of things happen and now we're like processing all of it right now. And yeah, Saturn's going to be retrograde till the end of, October, right? Until we're in the middle of the next eclipse cycle. So it's a big part of this time period for us. So thank you guys for being here. I really, truly appreciate each and every one of you so much. So a couple things to just let you know about Starseed Fellowship. If you are interested in that, you can find a link to Subscribe Star in the description box. You can check out a short video about the Starseed Ministry that's in the description box below. We're going to meet this week on Zoom and have our gathering. Our full moon is on the 14th, so there will be a Catalyst classroom next week. And I will have some promotional material out for you for that as well. If you're interested in a reading, energy work to support your process, I'm going to be offering reading sales for starseed markings and for the upcoming solstice. There'll be information for that as well. You might want to get on my email list or on Telegram if you're interested in getting that information in another format other than these videos, but that will be coming soon as well. So in the meantime, guys, have a good week. Take advantage of the opportunity to really get yourself in equilibrium and balance, and how important the perspective of living both of those things in contrast with yourself has been really important. And now that Saturn's retrograde, know where Aquarius is in your chart. See where that, internalized structure is going to start really being tested for you in the next, up until October, really, as Saturn is in its retrograde. So take care of yourselves, guys. I love you. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. I'll see you on the Starseed Fellowship gathering this week if you're part of that. And if not, I'll see you on Friday. We will be streaming live on Friday morning for the Catalyst Astrology Report. Until then, guys, take care of yourselves. Take care of the ones around you as much as you can. And I'll see you later. Bye.